This is Inside the Commission, a Gambling Commission podcast. Welcome to Inside the Commission, a podcast all about gambling in Great Britain. Here we'll cover all the latest topics and trends from across the gambling sector and discuss the big issues that matter to you. From consumer queries to industry insights, we'll bring you the facts from the front line of regulation and share the stats and stories from those in the know. For all the latest discussions and updates, you can subscribe to our Gambling Commission YouTube channel, or you can find us on your preferred platform, wherever you listen to your podcasts.
In today's episode, we're taking a step beyond the UK. We're looking at how international collaboration plays a role in shaping and supporting effective gambling regulation, both here at home and abroad. Working with regulators from the United States and all sorts of other global partners, we'll hopefully try and discover some of the consumer protection and policy development that's happening here in the UK. I'm joined by Tim Miller, Executive Director. Tim, do you want to tell a little bit about yourself for our listeners who probably haven't heard from you before?
Yeah, sure. So I've been at the Commission for almost 9 years now. When I first joined in 2016, it was as Exec Director, but with responsibility particularly for corporate affairs and communications. And over that time, my sort of role has developed. So I was responsible for setting up our Safer Gambling team when we had that. Most recently, I've been leading our policy work around the Gambling Act review and also leading our research and statistics team. So, I've worked in a lot of different parts of the Commission during my time here.
And have you enjoyed it? I mean, having such a big range of stuff to deal with obviously gives you a lot of, exposure to a lot of stuff that happens at the Commission, including the international stuff, but wider than that.
No, and genuinely, I have never enjoyed working anywhere more than this. Gambling regulation is such an interesting area. It's really intellectually challenging, which is what I always need in a kind of a role. It's really diverse what you're dealing with as well. But I think for me, the main thing and the main reason I joined the Commission was it was just the type of impact that you can have working here. We see both sides of gambling, the enjoyment that people can have, but we also see the very real harm that people can experience. And knowing that the things that we do here can potentially make a real difference to people is one of the reasons why I'm here. It's probably why most of our colleagues are here.
Brilliant. I suppose one of our sort of key pillars of the work we do is our international work and collaboration, and it's a word that's tossed around by lots of organisations. We collaborate, we work together, but genuinely we go out there and we talk to lots of other partners around the world, especially in the regulatory space. And one of the sort of the main areas is our collaboration with people over the pond to the USA, and I know you've been there for a few years. Give us a bit of insight into how you sort of got into that, or how those relationships started, when they started, and how you got involved.
Yeah, so I suppose the starting point to remember is that everything we do is seeking to deliver on the licensing objectives that we have in our legislation. So, keeping crime out of gambling, making sure that gambling's fair and open, and that children and vulnerable people aren't harmed or exploited by gambling. So that's always the starting point. And I think what we really recognised was that the industry that we regulate is increasingly international in the way it's set up. So the sort of companies that we regulate here, particularly the big companies, many of those are now operating in jurisdictions all over the world. And what that means is that gambling regulators across the world are dealing with the same companies, dealing with the same issues and risks. And so if we want to do a really good job here in meeting our licensing objectives, then of course we need to be working with people that are dealing with the same challenges around the world. And that's really the starting point for our international engagement. I think the United States and Canada in particular has been an area of focus because there's so many similarities across the jurisdictions. So, in particular, many of the same companies. And actually, many of the big companies operating in North America started off here. This has been, in many respects, a huge success story for the British economy that we've been able to build up some of these businesses with such an impact in North America. But that's why we've been working closely with colleagues over there so that we can share our knowledge and experiences.
And is there a lot of sort of interest from those partners to know more about what we do here that works well? Or are they just looking to see if there's stuff that they can do better? What are they actually after?
No, I mean, definitely. I think when we first started reaching out to colleagues in North America, I mean, they almost bit our hands off in many ways. And I don't think it's solely because they're looking to learn, what we might have done well. Although I think there's part of that. I think they probably also want to learn from some of the things that, some of the learning experiences we've had over the years as well. I think primarily it's a reflection that in terms of where their gambling industry is, particularly in the online space, Britain is a number of years ahead. We are still the biggest regulated online gambling market in the world. Many of the kind of regulatory issues that they're finding in particularly the United States at the moment happened here a couple of years ago. So, we're able to share how we sought to address those, how we've tried to drive up standards in the gambling industry. So I think it is that sign that, what's happening in America now has probably already happened here.
Right, okay. And since you've sort of been out there and started to build those relationships, have you seen a difference between what was going on then to what's going on? Has it moved on, and what sort of stuff has moved on in that space?
Definitely. I mean, I think, probably the first time I was out there kind of talking to regulators was way back, probably 2016, 2017, something like that. And, whilst we were dealing with some of the same companies, there were big differences, cultural differences, actually. Yeah. But also that was at a time when the online market hadn't really taken off in the United States. And indeed, sports betting wasn't really a big thing. It was only after that, following a Supreme Court decision, that sports betting really started to expand across the US. But I think, fast forward to now, and some of the regulators that I was talking to even a couple of weeks ago out in North America, their experiences, their views and outlook on how regulation should happen are so similar to us now. The kind of regulatory philosophy on both sides of the Atlantic feels much closer than it's ever been. And what that means is that the opportunities for collaboration are greater than they've ever been.
Yeah. It's interesting you say that, because we also spoke to Jeremy from NAGRA, and he was talking about how you can never have a one global framework for regulatory policy, but you're certainly moving, you're converging together. Is that what you're saying? Things are sort of aligning in certain places?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there was a time when it almost felt like regulators were looking for reasons to be different from each other, and that's long gone now. I'd agree with what Jeremy says. I don't think you could ever have a single consistent approach to all aspects of gambling regulation across the world. Because, I mean, for anyone that's ever kind of studied gambling, the way that gambling operates within a country often tells you a lot about how that society works, and it has some very unique characteristics to that individual society. So the regulatory approach needs to reflect that as well. But I do think there are all sorts of areas where actually we don't need to diverge. So you're starting to see this around kind of addressing gambling harms, for example. Very similar approaches taking place in all parts of the world. Single self-exclusion schemes are cropping up in many places. I think the other area where there is more potential for closer kind of harmonisation of approach would be around things like technical standards. Right. That actually the sort of the gaming machines, the online products that you see in one part of the world are very similar in another. Yeah. And if, as regulators, we can find areas where actually we don't need our technical requirements to diverge, then that benefits us as regulators, benefits the consumer, it benefits gambling companies. Yeah. And I think that's probably an area that we can continue to explore over the coming years.
Brilliant. Let's talk a little bit about the specific sort of partnerships then, or the groups that are over there that we're part of. I know you've recently come back from a trip. So what sort of initiatives are set up there that we access as a regulator, and how effective are they?
Yeah, so I suppose there's two levels that we've been working. One is with individual regulators over there, sometimes on specific issues. We worked particularly closely with colleagues in Ontario, and I think Canada being part of the Commonwealth, there was this sense of we were true sort of regulatory cousins in a way. So the kind of the successful kind of launch of the regulatory approach in Ontario has been built in, I think, large part on the model that we've had here. We worked very closely with them as they were developing it, sharing our learning, what went well, what didn't. And if you compare the two regulatory approaches in Britain and Ontario, you'll see a lot of similarities between them. And so, been working at that level with individual regulators. But then we've been working at the kind of the sort of the continental wide, I suppose, level. So NAGRA, which is the North America Gaming Regulators Association, brings together those gambling regulators across Canada, across the United States, and we've been a kind of a key part of that. We have associate member of NAGRA. We've been regular participants in their conference. I sit on their conference committee to help shape the sort of the agenda of their conferences, and I think working at that level has been so valuable because they have around about, I think, 60 or so jurisdictions that are their members. So by engaging through NAGRA, we can engage with a lot of jurisdictions in one go, which I think is really important and actually delivers really good value for money as a result.
Okay, brilliant. I mean, bringing it back to, I suppose, the UK then, and obviously going on these trips, we've spoken about it before. We're an organisation that people might be asking questions about what you're doing over there, or what's the benefit back to us or back to the regulatory framework here in the UK. I've heard Andrew talk about it in the past about it's us also, helping others to raise the standards, and it provides us an opportunity to talk to people who have developing markets, places like Brazil. What would you say to that sort of, line of questioning around going there and being part of that sort of initiative?
Yeah, so look, I mean, face-to-face engagement continues to be really important, even in the kind of post-pandemic world. You can achieve often so much more by being in a room with people. So it'll always be a part of our approach to engagement and collaboration. But frankly, it's only one part, and actually quite a small part. That so much of our engagement with regulatory colleagues around the world is, using things like Teams, through email, telephone calls. There's a lot that we still do remotely because we can, but you'll never fully replace that face to face. I suppose the other thing I'd say around it is that we are genuinely there to work with and support other regulators around the world. We really want to do that, but let's not pretend there isn't a self-interest in that for us. That we are primarily kind of doing that because we're driven by our licensing objectives, and we recognise that if we can work closely with other regulators around the world, it makes it easier for us to regulate some of those big international companies here in the UK. We avoid the risk of perhaps a company trying to play one regulator off against another, because we do regularly talk about the people we regulate. If you're operating in multiple jurisdictions, expect those regulators to be talking about you from time to time. Where we can get a similar approach to regulation, that just makes things easier for us and makes us more effective as a regulator. So, I'm completely unapologetic that there is an entirely selfish reason for the Commission to be doing international engagement, although I do think it generally benefits all of us.
Right. I suppose we're not trying to scare any of our operators, but we're just letting them know that it's a helpful way of us.
Absolutely.
Brilliant. Let's move on then, I suppose, beyond sort of North America then, because obviously your remit covers international regulatory partnerships across the board, and there's a lot of that work that goes on. From time to time we've released announcements of us signing MOUs with all sorts of countries and nations in Europe and Asia and other parts of the world. Why is it so important? And is it the same thing? Are we seeing the same approach that's in North America to what we're trying to do everywhere else? And is it working? And what do these MOUs look like? What do they mean?
Yeah, so I think there are some similarities. You know, wherever in the world you engage, there'll always be some similar drivers for that. But I think, you know, if you take Europe as an example, you know, clearly there is a geographic closeness there. And I think it's really striking in a way that, you know, although Britain left the European Union as a result of Brexit, that didn't in any way undermine the relationship that we had with our European partners. And there's a really, really strong community of regulators in Europe. So I sit on the board of GREF, which is the Gambling Regulators European Forum. And that brings together, I think, about 40 jurisdictions across Europe. We have an annual conference. We regularly do webinars and things like that. And there's very active engagement between them. So we actually have an online portal that all of the 40 jurisdictions share, where we can ask questions of each other, we can share ideas, you know, discuss kind of really key issues. So there's a real frequency of engagement. You know, there are people here speaking to colleagues in Europe probably every day of the year. So there's that very, very close engagement. And I think that in Europe at least has been built around kind of our very similar experiences. The way our gambling markets have developed have often been quite similar, have proceeded at, you know, broadly similar paces. So there is that very close relationship. In terms of other parts of the world, you know, if you look at some of the engagement we've had with some of the emerging jurisdictions in Africa, places like Botswana, or we've been working pretty closely over the last couple of years with the government in Japan as they're developing their approach to regulating gambling. And that, you know, those are newer relationships, and that has been very much about us sharing our knowledge and expertise. But I think as those jurisdictions are developing, we are starting to get just as much back. You know, although we're a really mature and well-established jurisdiction, you know, our approach was developing often before a lot of the technology was really developed. So, you know, although we've got a big online gambling market, we were already established as a market before online gambling really took off. Whereas for some of these newer jurisdictions, they've only ever known the sort of technologies that we've got now. And that brings a level of learning to these sort of issues that we don't have, and that we're really keen to get from those jurisdictions.
And so there's a lot of two-way sharing, so they are happy to, you know, give us that level of intelligence.
Definitely. I mean, it's not one-way traffic at all. You know, we are learning increasingly just as much from other jurisdictions as they're learning from us. And again, you know, building those really strong connections so that if we do find regulatory issues that cover multiple jurisdictions, we've got the relationships in place to work really effectively together. And I think that's going to be especially important as we see more and more some of the challenges that are coming from the illegal market, particularly in the online space. And that's something that, frankly, all regulators across the world are increasingly ramping up their efforts in.
So yeah, that was going to bring me on to that question around the illegal market. It seems to be a real pinch point of an area of real interest where everyone sort of wants to be involved or understand what's going on in that space or have a role to play in it. Are there other areas like that you can research maybe, or statistics that people are really interested in? Obviously we've launched the biggest gambling survey in the world of its kind. People will be looking at it quite enviously thinking, well, that data is driving a lot of information for the UK, but we don't have access to that kind of.
No. I mean, I suppose the regulatory issues around the illegal market bring I think, particularly unique opportunity for collaboration that probably no other area really has, in that whatever the regulatory philosophy, whatever the regulatory approach, we are all united in we don't want illegal operators operating in our jurisdiction. Now, the drivers for that may vary from country to country, but we are all agreed we don't want that happening. So it is one of those areas of regulatory work where, almost without exception, the regulators I speak to want the same outcomes as us. So there's real scope to work together there. And I think we've been taking a really leading role in that. So through the International Association of Gambling Regulators, which is a kind of global group for gambling regulators, we are chairing an international working group looking at the challenges that come from the illegal market. So again, we're showing real leadership there, but working closely with colleagues across the world. And day in, day out, we're working with other regulators in other parts of the world. Ontario, Mississippi, Japan. Just in the last few months, we've been having conversations with those sort of jurisdictions around how we can work together on addressing particular examples of illegal markets.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, that's really insightful. I think that sort of hopefully shines a light on the reasons why we do the work we do and the difference it's making. I suppose as a way of wrapping it up, what's coming next in the pipeline? Will continuing on the same track? What can we sort of expect to see in this space in terms of international partnerships?
So I think in many respects, kind of more of the same. I think, the work around illegal markets, for example, is nowhere near done yet. And I think, we're seeing more and more jurisdictions wanting to be a part of that work. I think what you'll also see is a build on some of the stuff that we've been doing here in the UK of targeting those kind of companies that, whether knowingly or unknowingly, are helping to facilitate the illegal market. So we have worked quite closely with a number of the big tech companies to address the ways that the illegal market is sort of trying to get access to consumers. So we've worked really closely with Google to remove illegal websites from the search results. I mean, this is on a huge scale. We're talking hundreds of thousands of URLs have been taken down because of the work we've done. Now, actually, if we start partnering with other regulators around the world to do that, then our collective voice is so much more powerful. We're an important regulator, but let's be honest, in the global perspective, a relatively small regulator in the United Kingdom trying to knock down the door of Meta, Google, people like that, it can be a real battle for us. But actually, if you start bringing these regulators together, if the 100 jurisdictions across Europe and North America collectively try to knock down those doors, you're more likely to be successful. And I think you'll see much more collaboration in that space, in trying to exert pressure on some of those companies that can actually support the work we're trying to do.
Take us a little bit more seriously, I suppose.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Tim. Really helpful to share some of that stuff with you today. And we'll hopefully speak to you soon on maybe another topic of interest at some point in the future.
Okay. Pleasure.
Nice.
This is Inside the Commission, a Gambling Commission podcast. To stay up to date with the latest content, you can subscribe to our Gambling Commission YouTube channel, or you can find us on your preferred platform, wherever you listen to your podcasts. Thanks for listening.